Welcome to the art room. Mrs. Larrabee here. This week we have some pumpkin artwork. It is fall, and that might be one of the reasons that we think about pumpkins this time of year, but I want to give you another reason to think about pumpkins. I want to introduce you to the artist Yayoi Kusama. Miss Kusama is a Japanese artist and a contemporary artist, meaning that she's still producing artwork currently in our time period. Miss Kusama was born in 1929, which is within just a few years of Mr. Julian Stanzak and Miss Bridget Riley, who we talked about in a few lessons ago when we looked at op art. So they were all born in the same period of time. And I bring this up because if you remember, this was the period of time during World War II. All three of these artists were either children or teens, young adults, during World War II. But all three lived in different countries. They experienced the war in different ways. Miss Kusama was born in Japan. She was born into a family of growers. They grew crops. They had warehouses and seed. During the war, there was a food shortage in Miss Kusama's community, and her family had a warehouse full of food that helped. This warehouse was stocked with pumpkin. In interviews throughout Miss Kusama's life, she has expressed her gratitude for those pumpkins, that pumpkins to her symbolize security. She's also known as the polka dot princess. Miss Kusama uses polka dots of different size and different variety. Also something that she terms the infinity net, which is this web-like structure in the back of the picture. These two things she uses to express this idea of being connected and a part of this bigness around us. So when we see a pumpkin and polka dots and an infinity net and a piece of artwork together by Miss Kusama, we know that she is representing and expressing to us a very deep thought. This week you have a choice of supplies. We kind of could go two different directions with how you want to proceed with your artwork. The first would be a piece of paper and crayons. I know that some of us have colored pencils instead of crayons. Colored pencils work as well. If you can use crayons, I would like to show you a new watercolor technique, and crayons will work best for that. It is not necessary that you have watercolor, and remember you can also use markers as watercolors. I'll go over that in a minute, so you could grab markers if you have that instead. You don't have to do this. We can stick just with crayons. If you would prefer to just stick with crayons or colored pencils, then you might want to find a piece of construction paper if you have any colored construction paper. I liked using the black on this project. I found that oil pastels worked better on the black paper than crayon. They just show up more brightly. But if you have a lighter color of construction paper, crayons and colored pencils would work well as well. All right, let's get started. All right, to start my artwork, I'm going to choose two colors. Miss Kusama often begins with the basics of just a couple, literally a pair of colors. And yellow and black is something that I see in her artwork often. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to be drawing one large pumpkin on my paper. It will end up with something like this. You could also draw a set of pumpkins on your paper. You can choose your composition. Think about that for a moment before you begin, because that will determine where you start. I'm going to start in the middle of my paper because I'm doing one. I'm going to start with the stem of my pumpkin. I'm going to go up near the top about 2 fingers down, and I'm going to draw 2 curved lines that are parallel and add a small circle to the end. This is the stem. And then I'm going to add a circle below the stem. This is going to be the top of the pumpkin. A lot of times in her artwork, she actually differentiates between the top of the pumpkin and the body. All right, and then let's take a look at this cool pumpkin. It has such neat markings on it. Kind of reminds me of that digital camo look. I wanted to take a moment just to observe how the lines in this pumpkin are, because we're going to be using the lines to draw our pumpkin to look like it has form, or 3-dimension. Notice how these lines are smaller at the top. They get wider as they go down, and then they go back smaller again towards the bottom. This reminds me a lot of the op art that we did with the arches, right? All right, so we're going to start by just drawing the center part of the pumpkin. It's going to feel maybe a little odd at first because sometimes we start with the outside edge. We're going to start with the center of the pumpkin. Miss Kusama's pumpkins are often not perfectly round, right? They have a little movement to them. So we're going to draw ours in a similar form. I'm going to start kind of towards the middle of the center. And I'm going to add a little bit of a wave to my line, and I'm going to let it get larger as it goes towards the bottom. I'm going to try to take up as much of the width of my paper as I can. And then this is the center part of the pumpkin. I'm going to start growing my pumpkin to the outside. So I'm going to move over just a tiny bit. I'm going to kind of copy the same line, but then I'm going to bring it back and connect at the bottom. I'm going to do this to both sides and connect it to the bottom. I'm going to continue to grow my pumpkin outward, however far you think your pumpkin should go. Some of these last ridges in the pumpkin, I won't be able to see the whole thing. They're going to be behind the edges of my pumpkin. And I think I'll just add a curved line to the back to show this back side of the pumpkin. All right, so there's the body of the pumpkin. If you want to add more than one to your paper, you could add another little guy hiding back here, behind there, overlapping maybe. She uses not just one size polka dot, and there's some order to them. So she has these large polka dots down the middle, these middle-sized polka dots, and then these smallest ones around the edges. And if you notice, as these ridges get further away from us, we can't see the entire pattern. We actually sometimes only see half of the polka dot or half of the pattern. All right, so let's try to apply that to our artwork as well. So I'm going to start down the middle with these large polka dots. One of the neat things about Miss Kusama's artwork is that she hand paints everything. So sometimes when I look at the detail and the repetition that she has, it's easy to think, oh, you know, it was computer made or screen printed on, but she actually hand paints each section. So I'm reminding myself of that as I'm drawing, not to rush, to take my time, good craftsmanship. All right, so there's one row of large. I'm going to go beside it with a row of medium. And notice that there's more in the pattern as they get smaller. So there weren't as many large dots. There's more little dots or medium-sized dots. And there's going to be the most of these tiny dots. And I'm kind of just following the edge of this line, kind of exaggerating or highlighting that same line. I'm going to do the same on this side, medium, and then small. And I'm going to continue this pattern as I go around my pumpkin. So now I'm on to a new section. I'm going to start over with large. They're going to start to go off the edge here. They're bumping into the ridge, which is where the next part of the pumpkin would start. So I'm not going to see the whole pattern every time. That's okay. That's showing the viewer that this pumpkin has depth and form. So really, I'm just going to see one side of this. And you know, I don't know if I even have room for the little lines. We'll see. Here's the medium-sized dots. Yep, I think I don't have room for the small ones, but that's fine. And then I'll continue on with the same large polka dots. You could start to add color on this. You do not have to stick with the basic colors like I am. You could make this as colorful as you want. When I used the oil pastels on the black paper, I did them one color, but then I went back and added a second color over the top, kind of highlighting it. Here's our pumpkin. We have our dots on. I'm going to take my opposite color and add a few little dots to the top, and I'll show you why in a minute. They're probably not going to show up super well right now. All right, so let's add some of this infinity net to the background now. When Mrs. Riley makes these, as I said, she hand does them, even though it looks so precise sometimes. With the infinity net, I would recommend you take your time. It's actually kind of a relaxing process once you get into it. But one of the things that I've noticed in practicing this myself in studying her paintings as well. She doesn't just add a bunch of lines and then cross over them and do this kind of systematic factory kind of infinity net. She actually individually makes each line, and it really does change what you end up with. Give it a try. Think about how these lines might connect. And instead of making these big sweeping lines that just quickly cover your paper, make each line intentional. Now, I know this infinity net may be a little hard to see on our video, but I made it this color for a reason. I wanted to show you a process with watercolor called oil resist. If you don't have watercolor, don't worry about it, but still watch, because I think you'll find this interesting, something to file away, maybe to use another time. Remember, if you have markers, you can use the markers on either wax paper or aluminum foil. You can just draw literally straight onto the aluminum foil and then use a paintbrush or a Q-tip with water on it, and just like a watercolor. You can make your own watercolor palette from those markers. All right, so here we go. I'm going to take a little bit of color and I'm going to add it to the top. Notice how wherever I drew with that yellow crayon, it's standing out and the watercolor's not sticking to it. This is called oil resist, and it's a process that just uses the oil and the crayon or the oil pastel, whatever you might be using, and it resists it. But the cool thing about it is that it just stands out so neat when you add the watercolor on. So here's what it looks like with the yellow. All right, so there's the pumpkin. I'm going to take the opposite color now and fill in the background. This is the really exciting part to me. This is when oil resist just works like magic to me. Can really see that yellow stand out now. I hope that you've had fun with this technique. You know, if you had a little salt like we tried in one of our other lessons, you could sprinkle a little salt around and see how that would absorb. It would add a little different element to it. If you choose to go with the pastels on paper or the crayons on paper, still adding that infinity net to the background, I went back and added a second color over just to add depth and a little more interest to the picture. I really enjoyed this process too, as much as I have this one. So 2 totally different looks, same project, up to you which supplies you have and which supplies you're interested in using. I'm grateful to have been doing art with you again this week, and I hope you have a wonderful time with our Yayoi Kusama project.